Good afternoon. I'm going to call the City Council meeting of January 28th, 2014 to order. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco, Hart, Hotchkiss, Murillo,
Here.
Rouse, White, Mayor Schneider.
Here. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Public comment. I have a few speaker slips here, and we have 2 minutes here at the podium there. We'll start with Scott Wentz. It will be followed by Clint Orr.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Scott Wentz representing Cars Are Basic. Last night at the workshop session, we urged you not to fund the roundabout for Cliff Drive and Las Positas because of the deficiencies in both the planning and the layout. We're back here to present to you our option. The option that Cars Are Basic has is 2 lanes going into the Cliff Drive with the option for the right-hand lane turning left. That will empty out Cliff Drive very efficiently. Right now, the City of Santa Barbara says that the delay, if you come to that stoplight at that time, will be 50 seconds. I can guarantee you that you have a double lane in there, it'll drop down to a minimum of 30 seconds. The other issue that we want to bring for you is the fact that you need to reinstate the right-hand turn lane that was there when I was both a student and a TA at City College. That right-hand turn lane worked wonderfully. Mr. Girth urged it to be taken out. There were no accident statistics to prove that that right-hand turn lane was a hazard, just 0. Now, the interesting thing about it is that the overlay that was presented at the ABR meeting by your staff showed the right-hand turn lane for the roundabout to be almost in the identical position of the old right turn lane. So why not do the simple one? Occam's razor. It's really simple. You have a crash lane on Las Positas. It's already paved. You add about another foot worth of pavement on it, you have your second right lane to left up on the Cliff Drive. You could probably do the entire project for $600,000. Not only can you probably do the entire project, but you have less impact. Now, the City of Santa Barbara, in its EIR for the Veronica Meadows development said, under CEQA, the city must identify feasible alternatives that will avoid or at least lessen any significant impacts.
Wind up, please.
Guess what? If you don't dig out that intersection, you don't have impacts, you don't have CEQA, you don't have anything but a negative declaration.
Clint Orr will be. Did you have a question, Mr.
I have
Hotchkiss?
a question, please.
Mr.
Have you
Hunt?
shown or discussed this at all with Derek Bailey?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Hotchkiss, no, I have not. I have sent in a letter via email to the department and received no response.
Okay, why don't you try again? Let me know what happens, okay?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Clint Orr will be followed by Steve Reynolds.
Thank you, Mayor Schneider and City Council, and those tuning in on TV. My name's Clint Orr, still. I'm here to campaign for your support to revive the fine art of couples dance here in Santa Barbara County. I do have my eyes on the Elephant Bar, and we'll have a proposal in February to convert the structure to a community dance hall as an amenity, if you will. And I know the concept of a guy leading and gal following is somewhat distant in this town. I know that alcohol sales and hip-hop have ruled, and very few people have the opportunity to go out to a national dance hall and dance in couples dance. Just for the record, I know this is hard, but I'm going to do it. I'm coming out right now. I'm straight, and I know it's. I'm a minority in the art of dance, and I probably won't get funded. But it's time to have. I think. My opinion is that guys should lead and gals should follow, and that we should provide habitat for that. and it doesn't exist in this county. There's no place you go out tonight and dance. So if you can tell me a place you can go out in Santa Barbara County and truly dance, go to dinner and dance, I'd be shocked, other than a studio with 12 people. And so anyway, I think that we need to provide habitat for our children and grandchildren to meet and dance, besides tap, jazz, and ballet and hip-hop. And I'll have a proposal in February to convert the Elephant Bar into a nonprofit-supported community dance hall. There's only one catch. It's going to be country music. So it's not going to be one genre one night, one genre the next. It's going to be all country all the time, supported by the California Country Dance Foundation. Thank you.
Steve Reynolds will be followed by Robert Burke.
Good afternoon, Council. I came here today to use my public comment to address the many items that have been confiscated over the years at the bike station. I've been a member for 6 years now, and there's been numerous times when city employees have confiscated material, never returned these items, or never, spoke to anybody about confiscated said items. A lot of people fear retribution when they discuss stuff like this coming up missing, and I'm not afraid of retribution, of course. In fact, last year I sat through the financial discussion regarding the budget reserves, and rest assured, there was little chance of a natural disaster that would require a surplus of $20 million. And as we all know, that money was spent in the reserves on these same city employees in question when it, questionable motives regarding their residents' rights and violation of civil rights and such and such. It's also quite coincidental that we are suffering from a natural disaster, a long-term drought, and we need $20 million just to get the $34 million desal plant. But rest assured, this town is swimming in money. It is. It's swimming in money. So I'm sure you'll get it. I'll probably never see my items, but good luck with that. Thank you.
Robert Burke will be followed by Phil Walker.
Madam Mayor, members, I'm informed that the library board discussion about the plaza did not include the homeless who occupy the plaza. Why not? I'm less concerned about who said what than I am about what was not said. What is the purpose of the library? Is the definition of the library include being a restaurant, a daytime residence, a hotel, a resort? That is what it is. Why is there no formal discussion and declaration about this? I believe it is something that crept upon us and settled in without public discourse. Do we want to include the current use of the library by the homeless to be policy or not? If we do, then we want a plaza to accommodate that. If not, then not. I am for a new plaza. The current one is ugly. But to put in a new plaza without considering the impact upon the homeless who use the plaza as a part-time resident is to treat them as second-class citizens, the untouchables, the unmentioned, the ignored. I raise the issue is to kick them out by construction, a violation of their habitation rights, and if so done legally, are we yet again being ugly Americans clothing ourselves in self-righteous legal niceties, kicking yet again indigents off land? Cast aside the cast-offs. How can you ask the citizens of this town to pay for a new plaza when the purpose of the plaza is not clear, when the purpose of the library is not clear? To talk about this later during design review, too often later turns into never. I want discussion of the social justice issues to be a declared policy of this council that is a condition of granting the money for further planning of the plaza. Too much talk never destroyed a democracy. Madam Mayor, members.
Phil Walker, followed by Brandon Morse, and then Crucito Herrera Cruz will be the final speaker.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. It's good to see you all. Much less tension today than at the COME meeting yesterday. There are significant water concerns. Okay, this gentleman was killed in Mission Viejo last month. A car penetrated his bedroom right where he was sleeping. much smaller car than penetrated my fence in September 1996, a Dodge Ram Charger at that time. And I was right on the couch in the front living room, and that could have been me. I've got the police report to this day. I think I'll frame it. There needs to be a suitable venue, it should be discussed in the ordinance committee to address as-built overheight fences, especially when the home property owner was advised by contractors it was great. In 1984 and 1977, there was no concern about building permits. And there needs to be a reasonable cost to bring my 4'10" chain link fence into compliance when it's just a few feet of chain link fence fabric. And it started out at $2,340 for a compliance fee, a modification. It was whittled down still to $1,390. And that fence, including double driveway gates that are not included in this fee, it costs nowhere near that. And I think if you adjusted for inflation, it probably would still not match that. So I'm performance driven, and you need to have reasonable performance driven code compliance fees. Thank you.
Brandon Morse.
I hope you guys have all gotten a copy of the letter that I sent. My name is Brandon Morse. I'm here to address the gang injunction. It has come to my attention that at least one member of this council has publicly questioned my comments, specifically my position that the city is declaring Santa Barbara specific area as a war zone. If you had taken the time to read the filings and cross-reference with the case law which you are citing, you would understand that the city is relying on the Acuna case to justify the gang injunction's implementation. In the Acuna case, the court justified its ruling, quote, the city, in its support of its plea for injunctive relief, paint a graphic portrait of life in the community, an urban war zone. The 4-square block neighborhood claimed as a chirp of a gang. Since the justification for Gallo versus Acuna 1997 was solely the declaration of an urban war zone, the city is simply trying to play semantics by using the term safety zone. When you are declaring on page 4 of your injunction, quote, separated by only the width of State Street in 2013, these two gangs are now at war with one another. Now at war with one another. Stabbing, attacking, and killing opposite members. Is this not an attempt to paint a graphic portrait of a community in an urban war zone? Plain semantics may be politically expedient, but it is not an honest reflection of your attempts by using the term safety zone as opposed to war zone. Let's call it what it is. Many of you may not be aware that on January 15th, 2014, City Council member Dale Francisco publicly stated at the Republican Central Committee meeting that he would be willing to debate anyone, anywhere on the subject of the gang injunction. As you could probably imagine, I was excited and jumped at the opportunity to accept this challenge, lest he made such comment for more political expedience. Now I state for the record here at public comment that I have sent an email to both Mr. Francisco and Valerie Watson, to which I have provided a copy to each of you on the City Council here today. I would like to invite all of you, including the mayor, City Council members, City administrators, City attorney, the district attorney, to join us at a special VIP section where we have dedicated for you at this special event. I am concerned that Mr. Francisco's city email is not working because I haven't received a response on this matter. Thank you.
Crucito Herrera Cruz. And then Kathy Swift, did you want to speak? Or you were? Okay. All right. Thank you. So Crucito Herrera Cruz will be the final speaker.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor Schneider and council members. This is an invitation from the Committee of Santa Barbara for District-Based Elections. There is a community meeting. Learn about it. Come and learn about district-based elections and what it could look like in Santa Barbara. It is scheduled for Saturday, February 22nd at 1 p.m., and that's at the Davis Center. Location 1232 de la Vina Street, Santa Bárbara, California. Para las personas que están escuchando en los televidentes que están allá, yo soy Crucito Herrera Cruz. Esta es una invitación del comité de los miembros del comité del distrito de Santa Bárbara. Y vamos a tener un foro y un taller para este evento. Va a ser el sábado, el 22 de febrero, a las 1 de la tarde en el Davis Center, en 1232, la calle de la Vina, Santa Bárbara, California. Come and learn about district-based elections. It's a community meeting. This event is for free, and we talk about district-based elections and what it could look like. The symptoms of having a possible unconstitutional gang injunction implemented After the fact, we'll realize in operation of law, when it gets appealed, that that broad brush was incorrect public policy that you are taking at this moment. I've documented it when I ran for city council in 2011 on YouTube. In 2013, I still stand in solidarity against this measure, and I'm announcing officially, for the people that have guessed, I'm running again in 2015, everybody. Viva el voto.
That concludes public comment. We move on to the consent calendar. You have some items to read.
Item 2, introduction of ordinance for amendment to lease agreement with La Patera Investors for property at 80 South La Patera Lane, recommending that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara approving and authorizing the airport director to execute a third amendment to lease number 19067 between the city of Santa Barbara and La Patera Investors LP, a California limited partnership, amending Article 23, subletting and assignment to allow encumbrance of the leasehold by an approved mortgagee. And item 10, right of entry for the possession and use of real property, interim vacancy agreement and reimbursement agreement at 13 East Cabrillo Boulevard for the Cabrillo Boulevard Bridge Replacement Project, including recommendation A, that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara authorizing the acting public works director to accept and execute a right of entry for the possession and use of certain real property located at 13, otherwise known as 15 East Cabrillo Boulevard, assessor's parcel number 033111012, 21 Helena Avenue, assessor's parcel number 033111004, and 6 State Street, assessor's parcel number 033111011, and such other agreements and related documents as may be required, all relating to the Cabrillo Boulevard Bridge Replacement Project, and consenting to the recordation of a memorandum of right of entry in the official records, County of Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll wait for the reading. Does anyone need to take an item off? Mr. Rouse?
Yes, item 8, please, Madam Mayor.
Item 8? Okay. Sorry.
Item 4, please.
And item 4. Okay, why don't we go in order? So if you could read item 4.
Agreement for parking citation program analysis.
Ms. Maria?
Thank you. This seems like a serious matter that we should have an open session on. If someone's here to talk about why there's a need for this analysis, I'd be interested to hear it. But it seems like we were budgeted for a smaller amount of money. It's more than twice as much. There was only one a response to the request for proposals, and for us to be looking at outsourcing this program that includes 14 parking enforcement officers and 3 staff people, it seems like something that the City Council should be reviewing before going forward. I'll be voting no. I'm just feel that strongly about it.
I can let the police department describe generally why they selected this firm, but let me say that this is to do basically a management audit of the parking citation program from the moment a citation is issued, and then all of the processing of how people pay, who collects the money, the processing of the payment. And it's about a $2.5 million a year program. As you know, we had some serious irregularities in that program 2 or 3 years ago. This is to do a full-scale look at it. There have been no decisions made to outsource any of that work. Those may be some of the recommendations that come out of the study. I don't know what will come out of it. You're correct that the price was higher than was anticipated, but I think in talking with the police department, they felt that that this would be a valuable study to them to give them information about, is the program running well, is it running efficiently, should we make changes to it. But I'll also let the police department add to that.
Ms. Peterson?
Can I respond at this point? What you said is that, we had this problem 2 or 3 years ago. I thought something was being done in the last 2 or 3 years to make sure that there were no more irregularities. It just seems this is very late, and we hadn't been kept updated about it.
And we have made, many corrections to our systems to make sure that there's no more dishonesty there. But it also, as we did that, we said we really need to look at the whole system, like I said, from the moment a citation is issued all the way through. and we felt, in talking with the police department, that made sense to look at it. But this is more than just because we had the embezzlement. It's also it's a large program. It involves a lot of money, and to look are we running it as efficiently as possible.
Ms. Peterson, did you want to add anything else?
Mayor Schneider and council members, the project is to look at from the citation issuance all the way through to final collection. So really looking at our best business practices. Are we using the most current technology that is available to us? Our system could use some upgrading, and are we going to go for a cloud-based? Do we want to look at all the options that have evolved over the last 20 years since our current parking system was implemented? So really taking advantage of the time to look at best practices. Technology, is it moving forward in a large step coming up, or are we kind of where we need to be before we make another commitment? Looking at those options, is outsourcing one of the features, and the consultant will be presenting us all of those options, the cost-benefit analysis, and where the best business practices lie at this point in the industry.
Well, it does seem like that kind of analysis needs to be done. I guess I'm saying I wish it would have been done sooner. But I want to go on record as saying that I really don't ever support anything being outsourced. I trust our police department to handle this function and to give tickets and collect the money and make everything right. So I'm going on record as saying that. But I guess when you put it like that, we do have to look at the practices. So I guess I will vote yes for it. Just going to be on record that I want it to stay with our. I know a lot of the parking enforcement officers, and I wouldn't want them to lose their jobs, and I want that to be known clearly.
Mr.
Thank
White?
you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, first of all, a question, and that is, would then council hear back on the results of this study? Would that be something that would come back, and could the council get at least an update of the findings of this effort?
Yes, we can bring the recommendations back to council for.
So maybe that would lower some anxiety there a little bit. And secondly, my recollection is that when I came on council, that the business manager position had not been filled for a while, and that now that position is refilled, and you're in that position at this point. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that's one of the strategies that was put in place in order to reduce the risk of the repeat of the Flores incident. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay, so at least some efforts were made strong efforts were made to remedy the problem, and Ms. Peterson being before us today is one of them. And then this is obviously one more step is to tighten up the controls going forward. And particularly if with council getting at least an update of how the results of this, it might be useful and informative to everybody to learn about it.
Did you want to vote on this separately?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I'm glad it's coming back to us. I can't even believe there was a question that it wouldn't come back to us. Thank you.
Okay, if you could read item number 8, that's the other consent calendar item.
Goleta Slough Mouth Biological Assessment Contract.
Thank you. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see that Mr. Lincoln is in the audience there, Ms. John. So I don't need to vote on this separately, but I did have some questions regarding the Goleta Slough Mouth, which was formerly permitted and opened periodically by the Santa Barbara County Flood Control District, and I see that permit has expired. And now we have issues with 15 left and 15 right, the runways that go, the terminus is near that area, and I suppose has now become an issue for flight safety. My questions are, first of all, what is our purview there? Clearly our desire is for flight safety, but we are dealing in somebody else's jurisdiction. So how does this permit process work? Who actually does the work once it's approved, and where do we go from there? Number one. Number two is there FAA involvement? And what are the remedies if not? If nothing's done, or I guess the last thing would be, well, go ahead with that, because I have one question after that, if you would, please.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, I'm Andrew Bermond, the project planner for the airport. Our purview is essentially we're working in partnership with the County Flood Control District. They would be the ones that actually completed the work. However, when they were engaging with the federal resource agencies in reapplying for their permit, they were asked to complete a number of studies, which they found to be too difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. So they separated the Goleta Slough out from the rest of their South Coast-wide management strategy so that they could get their approvals and keep doing their job. And so the airport is stepping up because we're the ones that have found the most difficulty with the mouth being unmanaged. And we're in the process of preparing an update to our wildlife hazard management plan, which we will do in cooperation with the FAA. And in so doing, we will be able to better identify what are critical species and the habitat types that are of highest hazard for aviation.
So what are the specific objections by the National Marine Fisheries Service?
The National Marine Fisheries Service is primarily concerned with steelhead trout habitat. And there's some evidence that periodic closures of estuaries are beneficial to steelhead trout breeding. And what we need to do is identify a way we can still manage water levels with minimal impact to steelhead trout. The previous management strategy was to open it 2 weeks after closure. Perhaps that's too aggressive.
So similar to the issues we faced at Mission Creek when we would used to be able to breach that, but of course we're not talking about flight safety there, but similar issues in terms of species, tidewater gobies, steelhead, that kind of thing.
Yes.
All right, very good. All right, thank you.
Is there a motion for the consent calendar? Is there a second? Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Report from the Finance Committee, Mr. Francisco.
Madam Mayor, the Finance Committee met today and we heard reports. We had the quarterly investment report as well as a detailed summary of the CAFR, which we'll be hearing more about soon.
Okay, thank you. Item number 13.
Contract for construction for the temporary relocation of the 911 call center.
Thank you, Mr. Hagmark.
Madam Mayor, council members, and successor agency board. My name is Joshua Hagmark. I'm the Water Resources Manager, and I'm here today to walk you through the recommendation for construction for the temporary relocation of the 911 call center. With me today, I have Ralph Molina, captain with our police department, and he's responsible for the 911 call center currently, and some others from the PD if there's any questions along the way. So basically, before I jump into the recommendations, I wanted to kind of walk everybody through how we got here, because I think it's been a long path to this point. And I'll start in 2011 when staff completed a needs assessment of the current police station. And out of that needs assessment, numerous deficiencies were identified in the building, which included a seismic structural performance concern. Including electrical, heating. I mean, pretty much every one of the building systems is in some point of failure. But out of that discussion, council was so concerned they created a subcommittee in which they took a closer look at the issues, and out of that recommendation was to move the 911 call center out of the current police station. And it was driven by two major items. One was the concern about the seismic performance of the police station, and the other one was based off of the premise that the current police station needs to be replaced, and if it's replaced, it will be replaced in the same general location, which will require the 911 call center to be moved anyway. And so taking advantage of getting it out of there and getting it in a safe working space was the premise behind this project. So we started down the design road, but in 2012, the RDA's assets were frozen, which pretty much put the project on hold. Then in March 2013, the council decided to pull from general fund resources and put together $278,000 to let us move forward with a final design for the temporary location. So that brings us to today. I'm before you with several contracts. If you've seen it in there, there are two main ones, though. The project is approximately $2 million. The two contracts, one is for general construction, and that addresses the physical changes to the interior of the Granada Garage building, Granada Garage office building, and that includes basic electrical changes, HVAC, fire suppression, security, and then basic carpentry that needs to be done. And then the second component of that is the systems integration, which is probably the most sensitive part of the whole project, and that's the actual relocation and purchase of new 911 equipment and migrating the whole 911 operations over to this new location seamlessly without interruption of service. Just to give you some parameters to the design, the project encompasses about 2,600 square feet of the second floor of the Granada Garage office building. The space is currently occupied by the Environmental Services Group and a large conference room. During construction, the Environmental Services Group will be moving to the basement of the library temporarily throughout construction, and then we'll move back to the renovated space, and the large conference room will be going away. The proposed layout includes 1,400 square feet for the 911 call center and approximately 1,200 square feet for environmental services. Construction is anticipated to take about 6 months, and we should be done wrapping up sometime in August of 2014. Funding for this project is made available through former RDA bond funds, and I do have Mr. Casey on hand today if there's any questions about the funding source. That completes my presentation, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you. Do we have any speaker slips on this? Nope. Any questions or comments? Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Hagmark, this is the temporary call center. A couple of questions. Does any of the work or any of the technology relate to the money we forwarded for the microwave towers for the fire department communications last night?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, this project is all-inclusive, includes costs to completely move all microwave and communication needed for the 911 call center.
Are they separate, completely separate systems?
Are they? Appears they are.
All right, good question. Second thing is, the earthquake standards normally used for essential buildings, are they or are they not met in this facility?
That's a great question. The reason that this is a temporary relocation is this building meets life safety, which means this building will survive an earthquake and will protect its occupants. But in order for it to be a permanent home of the 911 call center, it needs to meet this essential services building performance, which is like a hospital or school, and that is a building that has been designed to perform through and following a major earthquake. And that this building, at this point, we didn't go into building the Granada Garage with that, and it can't just be easily upgraded to meet that.
You could not retrofit this building to make this a permanent situation?
Right, not cost effectively, no.
Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is the new 911 center the same size as the center that exists in the basement of the police headquarters now, or are we able to get a little more space there?
Councilmember White, this facility is a little bit bigger. I think the current facility is about 900 square feet, and so it's a little bit more space. We were able to add 2 more workstations, so this facility will be, I think, better capable of handling the larger events that we have, especially during the 4th of July and Fiesta, when we really need to bring more officers on board to answer calls.
It did feel as if that the headquarters space is tight, so glad that there is a little more space there.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. How long can we temporarily be there? Is there a limitation?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, I don't know of a limitation at this point,
Okay.
but the building official would have to chime in on that.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Francisco?
Madam Mayor, this is not meant to limit discussion, but I would move recommendations A and B for the City Council and for the successor agency, as well as recommendations A, B, and C for the successor agency.
Second.
Okay. What happens to the current space in the police headquarters after this is done?
Madam Mayor, that's a great question. As you know, they're trying to keep the police station operational, the facility operational, and so the facilities manager is working to move forward with some small projects to make working there a little more hospitable. And so we'll be using that space maybe to shuffle people around as we do little small improvement projects here and there. So it's basically going to be used to help make improvements. And when it's all done, I think it'll be up to the police as to how they want to use it for other needs. I'm sure they could come up with a need for it.
Great. Thank you. I just also want to commend city staff, Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Casey, and Ms. Connect on getting that bond money secured through the State Department of Finance. That wasn't an easy thing to do, and a lot of steps had to be made in order to get to today. So it's a good chunk of change, and that was made last night's hearing even easier because this didn't have to be on the list. So, Mr. White.
Well, and to follow on that, I think that as far as this effort is, it's making the best of a lousy situation. Obviously, we lost a lot of money with in our efforts to rebuild, to create a new police headquarters, which is desperately needed. But this is triaging and is doing accomplishing one of the essential needs going forward. So again, I think staff came up with this as a strategy, and I appreciate it. I think it is going to make the people of this city safer. So I think it's a creative and excellent effort.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Great. Thank you very much. Item number 14.
Introduction of ordinance for the 2013 to 2016 General Unit Memorandum of Understanding, recommending that council ratify the Memorandum of Understanding between the city and the Santa Barbara City Employees Association, Local 620, Service Employees International Union for the period of October 1, 2013 through September 30, 2016, by introduction and subsequent adoption of, by reading of title only, an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara adopting the 2013 to 2016 Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara City Employees Association General Unit, and providing for compensation changes for confidential employees.
Thank you. Ms. Schmidt.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, City Council members. I'm Christy Schmidt, Acting Administrative Services Director. On December 19th, negotiators for the city reached a tentative agreement for a new 3-year labor deal with our general bargaining unit. That tentative agreement was ratified by the membership on January 15th. The general bargaining unit is our largest bargaining unit. There are 430 employees citywide in this bargaining unit, and they range everywhere from the trades workers and maintenance to administrative employees to our professional employees, our engineers and our planners. So it's a very large bargaining unit. Some of the highlights of the agreement include that employees will receive 7% in salary increases over the 3 years. They will also relinquish their vacation cash-out benefit, and in exchange for that will receive the value of that benefit in other ways, an additional 0.5% salary increase, an additional $30 per month toward their medical benefit for families, and a final cash out of 50 hours will be part of that agreement. Other minor increases are included in the agreement, including a reduction in the qualifying service to be eligible for the retiree medical. There are some special salary adjustments based on a market survey for a limited number of classifications from between 2% and 5% over the 3-year term. And we've agreed to reinstate our educational reimbursement policy. The costs of the agreement were anticipated when we developed the fiscal year 14 and 15 2-year plan. And we anticipate that the costs will be able to be absorbed in the current fiscal year budget. The ongoing cost of the 3-year agreement will be $2,539,762 citywide. About half of that, about $1,214,357, will be in the general fund. In addition, it'll cost us $45,000 to reinstate the educational reimbursement policy citywide, and we will include that in the fiscal year 2015 budget. and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Do we have any speaker slips? Nope. So questions or comments from the council? Or a motion?
I move that we adopt the recommendation that we introduce the ordinance today that lays out this MOU.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much. Item number 15.
Amendments to quorum standard for single-family design board, recommending that council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Section 2269010 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code relating to the conduct of meetings of the single-family design board.
Thank you, Ms. Weiss.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm standing in today for Mr. Limon, who has the lead staff position with the Design Review Board, the Single Family Design Board. This is a matter of a procedural meeting quorum change, and it has been discussed at the Single Family Design Board as well as the Ordinance Committee, and we're bringing you today a proposed municipal code amendment related to the section of the code that relates to the Single Family Design Board. The proposed change to the quorum standard would be to allow one licensed architect instead of the current 2 licensed professionals as the minimum requirement in establishing the quorum for 4 members on the Single Family Design Board, or SFDB. The SFDB ordinance section read by the clerk, 2269, was established in 2007 when the Single Family Design Board was established. Many of the functions of this board were at one time within the purview of the Architectural Board of Review. So when this new section and board was created, to a large degree, it was meant to mimic the ABR. It's a 7-member board. For some reason that we're not entirely clear on, we did create the minimum quorum for the Single Family Design Board different than that from the ABR. So actually the proposal today is to have the same, it's a body of 7 people. The minimum quorum is 4 members. Of those 4 members, what's proposed is that one would be a licensed architect. What's occurred over the last few years is we've actually had loss of quorum. We start a meeting and we're not able to complete the meeting, or have difficulty in scheduling a meeting because the current membership of the Single Family Design Board and this requirement of 2 licensed professionals has been hard to hold together during different times. There aren't any other proposed changes to the composition of the board. The board member appointing process that the council undertakes can generally provide, per the makeup of the board, a balanced board that provides the required expertise and consideration of the projects. The reasons, again, that we've had the difficulty is, well, at present, we happen to have 2 licensed architects and 1 landscape architect. In the event, say, that we had 3 architects, this probably wouldn't be as much of a concern, but right now there are 2 licensed architects. The possibility that one of the board members just has a scheduled vacancy has occurred due to personal needs. And then we also do have some of the architects on our boards, as you know, they're practicing architects. They may have a project where they have a conflict and can't represent the board. They need to represent their client. So those have been the reasons why we've had to cancel. So the language change for the ordinance is fairly simple within this chapter and section, and that's attached to your report today. It's shown on the overhead here. It still would remain a 4-member board constituting the quorum, but instead of saying 2, it would say 1 of whom shall be a licensed architect. And presently, as this was discussed at the Single Family Design Board, the licensed landscape professionals are really important to the overall process. But again, mirroring the ABR, and for the general overall project review, we would prefer that the 1 licensed professional be a architect, a building architect. As I mentioned in the introduction, this has been supported by the Single Family Design Board and the Ordinance Committee. We see that the work of the Single Family Design Board will continue to function as you would expect. And so, again, our recommendation is that today you introduce an ordinance and then subsequently adopt the amendment that results to the Single Family Design quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any speaker slips, so it's to the council. Mr. Hotchkiss.
This all sounds very reasonable. Could we, and I'm just in case, or to ensure we don't have unintended consequences, can we review this in a year's time, or would you review it, or how do we sort of, make sure we've done it right?
Well, certainly if problems come up, just like how this came up as a result of problems, we'll be aware of those. And at one point during our joint sessions, special sessions, in a year or so from now, I can report on that.
Thank you.
I think as a general information item, if it really turns out to be a major issue that we think absolutely needs addressing, we would return for your direction. But we will track this and be able to report on it.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody thinks this will be a major problem, particularly if we say we're watching out for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Maria.
Thank you, Ms. Weiss. Do we have an issue where we have a limited number of architects in our area where they've served already and they're tired of it, or it's not enough glory or something?
Councilmember Murillo, we have in the city of Santa Barbara the three bodies of the Architectural Board of Review, the Single Family Design Board, and then the Historic Landmarks Commission that specifically require as part of their constitution to have licensed architects and professionals. We are not alone. There is also the city of Goleta, and they have an architectural board. There is the county. There's the Montecito Board of Architectural Review, and South County, the County of Santa Barbara Planning and Development. So there is a demand for professionals to volunteer and participate in these kinds of reviews. And over the years, we have had some concern about the recruitment and retention of members on these boards. It's quite a commitment as well in terms of weekly or biweekly meetings that does cut into their professional workday and sometimes run late. On top of that, we had some discussion with the council and the city attorney's office about limiting these professionals' ability to undertake contracts with the city, the agency that on the board that they're serving. And that has caused some concern as we talk with people and try to generate interest of folks to participate in this process. But generally, I would say there is a lot of interest within the profession, the design profession. This type of review and service is something that is somewhat inbred and learned as you're becoming licensed and professional, and they know the importance of a review process. So on balance, we continue to see people in the community step forward. We've also amended your recruiting and appointment procedure, such that these boards also can draw from residents within the South County instead of just the city limits. So a lot of things have happened lately because it can be difficult to recruit and retain. But there are many qualified people in the community, so it's just a matter of staying current with these kinds of issues and being responsive as best we can.
Well, it does seem that this change would help in that if there's a competition problem or a recruitment problem. Thank you.
Mr. White?
Mayor, I was just going to add that Ms. Weiss listed most of them, but also Hope Ranch has a Board of Architectural Review, and the Gaviota Coast has a Board of Architectural Review. And architects serve on the various planning boards as well. So they're called on to participate in our land use process heavily. And so it's a real demand, and it's a real service that they provide to the region. So it gets thin from time to time.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
Madam Mayor. I would, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
I would like to make that motion, Madam Mayor, that we adopt, as staff recommends here, changes to the Single-Family Design Board quorum standard.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Great. Thank you very much. Item 16.
Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2013.
Great. Mr. Samario.
Exactly. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. The new phone books are here. So we're here to present to you what we call the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or the CAFR. This is, I think, a very important document that we produced. It's, in my opinion, it's same as a budget. It's just looking historically, looking back instead of forward, but it is an important document. And not so much because of what it represents, but also because of the fact that we spend a lot of time during the July through December here in finance to prepare this document. So it's a big part of what we do. You're probably aware of the fact that we are normally here in December presenting this report, but we're here in January because our priority in the last year really has been in implementing the new financial management system, most of which came online in January. So, but we're still, I think, reasonably timely. We're here in January instead of December.
Vicki? Mr. Samario, I already have a copy. What you're passing out today, is there revisions?
No, just in case you didn't bring it with you, we made sure you had a copy.
Thank you.
Any extras, we'd be happy to get back from you. So the report's going to be actually presented to you by Julie Nemes, our accounting manager. She's only been here a year, and this is really her first time going through our year-end closing and preparing our CAFR, so I really want to acknowledge her. She's worked really, really hard in the last, along with her staff, and in the midst of the FMS replacement, she's put in a lot of hours for this, so I think it's a good project, and we're happy to have her. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. I am Julie Nemes. I'm the accounting manager for the finance department, and I will be presenting the comprehensive annual financial report for June 30th, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2013. There are 4 areas I'm going to be covering today: the background of the CAFR, the layout and contents of the report, the financial highlights, and then finally the audit requirements and results of the CAFR. First, I'm going to focus on the background of the CAFR. I wanted to quickly thank all of the staff that worked very hard on the preparation for this comprehensive annual financial report. Mr. Samario did mention that, as you all know, we're in the middle of a financial management system implementation, and the same staff that worked on much of that implementation are the staff that prepare this CAFR. So I wanted to publicly recognize Doug Smith, Lynn Sparks, and James Hamilton. We have 2 of them here today right in the back, and maybe they can just stand up so you know who they are, and just thank them for all of their hard work. Thank you, guys. Now, to go over what actually is a CAFR. Every government agency has to produce an annual financial report in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. This basically just presents the financial condition and results of operations of the city, both as a whole and for individual funds. What makes the difference between an annual report and a CAFR is that a CAFR is comprehensive. It includes information that is not required, that's unaudited, and it basically just provides more information for the reader, for the public. It also qualifies the document for the GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officer Association's award program, which is a prestigious award. Now, why do we prepare the CAFR? City charter does require us to prepare an annual financial report to be audited by an independent CPA firm. It is also required by state and federal law. It's important in issuing bonds. Our bond rating agencies do read and look at the CAFR to determine our credit risk, our interest rates on our long-term debt. And finally, it's an item I already mentioned, is that it's important communicating the city's financial position to the public. Next, I'm going to focus on the layout and contents of the report. There are 3 sections of the CAFR. First is the introductory section. In this section is the letter of transmittal that comes from the city administrator and the finance director to council. Also, there's some other city organizational information, such as the organizational chart, the list of council members. Second is the financial section. This is what's actually covered by the audit opinion. There's an independent auditor's report, which I believe is listed on page 9 and 10. It's a 2-page report where the auditors actually render their opinion. Next is the management's discussion and analysis. This is a really good summary. If you don't want to read through the whole 150-page report, I would recommend spending some time on the management's discussion and analysis, because it will give you a good summary of what happened throughout the year and where the city was at the end of the year. Third, under financial section, are the basic financial statements, which are all of the numbers, and then the notes, which provide some more information on the numbers. And the final section is statistical section, and that's what's kind of makes the CAFR a comprehensive annual financial report. I'm going to be focusing today on the basic financial statements. And there are two sections, two types of statements for the basic financial statements. You have government-wide statements, which back in 2001, we had to implement per GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board. All agencies, government agencies, had to start reporting on a government-wide basis. Basically, this means that we're reporting the city's operations and results for the city as a whole. And we're looking at all of the assets and liabilities of the city. And it's more of a long-term focus. Whereas the individual fund financial statements, which is what we've been presenting for a very long time, look at the individual funds. It's more of a short-term focus, and it's more of a spendable resources focus. What do we have available to spend? Now I'm going to focus on some financial highlights. If you turn to page 24, if you want to follow along, we have the first statement, which is the government-wide statement of net position at June 30. This is the government-wide. This is for the city as a whole. It does break it out between the two types of activities. You have governmental activities and business-type activities. Governmental are going to be the general operations of the government, generally funded by taxes, intergovernmental revenues. The general fund is included in there. And then you have the business-type activities, which are the enterprise funds, the water, wastewater, downtown parking. And they're more of a business purpose. They are generally funded by fees, charges for services, program revenues. So I'm going to focus first on the total assets. I wanted to point out that we have, for the city as a whole, a little over $1 billion in total assets. And the majority of that is made up of capital assets. About $760 million of the $1 billion is capital assets. Second, I wanted to point out our total liabilities. We have about $200 million in total liabilities, which is a significant number, but it is a substantially smaller number than our total assets or our net position. And the majority of that is related to business-type activities. About $162 million of the $200 million is related to enterprise funds. And the last piece I wanted to talk about is our net position. I wanted to really focus on the restricted and unrestricted. You'll notice that in the restricted, there's on the governmental activities. That's really related to external restrictions from creditors, laws, regulations. Of that $66.5 million in governmental, about $51 million relates to the Affordable Housing Fund, the loans receivable outstanding. So that's the majority of what's restricted. What's left is unrestricted, and that's really all the funds that have not been restricted for a specific purpose, for capital programs, anything like that. So there's about 141 of unrestricted in total. Moving on, this is the statement of activities for government-wide for the city as a whole. And on your page 25 is actually the governmental and business type are put together or shown together, but I'm going to break them up so that it's a little bit simpler to see. This is the governmental activities. And what's important about this one is that it really shows what, by program, by department, how much taxes and intergovernmental revenues are subsidizing their operations. So if you look at public safety, they have about $61.7 million in expenses, about $12 million in program revenue, for a net of almost $50 million in a general fund subsidy or general subsidy. So this really gives you a good idea of how much general revenue taxes, intergovernmental fund the other programs. And overall, I wanted to point out that this shows you your change in net position. So for governmental activities, the change in our net position for fiscal year 13 was about $13 million.
Ms. Nemes, I did have a question, and you triggered me because I had a note here about the city's Affordable Housing Fund. So those are outstanding loans but people aren't going to pay them, or the entities aren't going to pay us back right away.
I'm not sure about the timing.
Yeah, Councilmember Murillo, those are affordable housing loans. They're going to be repaid over time. They have different terms and conditions, but for the most part, we expect those to be repaid. In certain cases, they may not, depending on the circumstances, but we expect generally that those amounts will be repaid, but they are restricted assets, so that's why we show them as being restricted.
I also saw here that the Community Development Block Grant Program includes or are part of those funds. How is that?
It's restricted because they're restricted to programmatically by the grant award or grant documents to specific purpose. So community development, block grant is for community development, or affordable housing monies are for affordable housing. So they're restricted by federal law through the grant agreements.
And that includes like home funds that are granted to many times to like multi-unit properties for rehabilitation or for property investment. And then we used to do a lot of single-family housing rehab loans that we don't do many now for a variety of reasons. And I'll correct Mr. Samar a little bit. Many of those housing loans are what we call residual receipts loans, and a lot of them will not be paid back. So some of them will be at a later date, but in many cases, these are designed to subsidize affordable housing and keep the rents low, and we don't expect to see a lot of them paid back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So just really quick, the 13 million change in net position, that is a positive change in net position for governmental activities. So moving on, it's the same statement but for business type activities. And the difference here between the governmental and business is that you'll notice for enterprise funds, there isn't a subsidy here. They're funded, their expenses are funded by revenues from program revenues, fees, charges for services. So you'll notice that, for example, water had expenses of $32 million. They had revenues, program revenues of $38 million for a net of almost $6 million. So they're not funded by general taxes or intergovernmental, they're funded by their actual program revenues. So I wanted to point out that for all the different enterprise funds, all of them had revenues greater than expenses except for golf. And we know that over the last few years, golf has experienced, has taken a little bit more of a hit from the economic downturn. So that's why they do have expenditures exceeding revenues by about $115,000. But overall, for business type activities in total, the net change in position is $8 million. So now that we talked about the city as a whole, I wanted to focus on the general fund individually, which is now the balance sheet for the general fund. This is going to be on page 26. And as I mentioned before, the individual fund balance sheets do not have long-term assets or debt, so they don't represent capital assets or long-term debt. So you'll notice that total assets for the general fund are about $35.8 million. Total liabilities are $6.6 million. And the total fund balance is about $29 million. I just wanted to spend a little time talking about the bottom, the fund balance, and the categories. They are different for individual funds and balance sheets than they are for the government-wide statements. So the non-spendable, I'm going to focus kind of on two areas, the non-spendable and the committed, which is the majority of what's reported under fund balance. The non-spendable represent assets that are in a non-spendable form. It's going to represent the loans receivable, the advances, such as the promissory note to airport, to waterfront. Their assets for CAFR reporting purposes are considered not in a form that can be spent at this time. Whereas the committed, that is actually going to be the city council policy reserves, the disaster contingencies. That's what's in that about $21 million number. And what I wanted to point out is that that number of $21 million is a little different than what we reported to you at year end. And the reason for that is for CAFR reporting purposes, there are items that we list as being non-spendable, such as the promissory notes to airport and to some of the enterprise funds that are actually listed in the non-spendable portion of the fund balance that we consider to be available, that they have available reserves. The airport promissory note is actually in our investment pool. So that's where you see the difference of about $4 million. Now the general fund results, actually if you could move to page 83, because I'm presenting this both for the actual results for revenue expenditures along with the budget, and this is in our required supplementary information. I am showing this in a summary form, so the revenue and expenditures actually include transfers. Transfers in are included with revenues, transfers out for expenditures. This year there was a rather large amount for transfers out because we had some one-time revenues that we did transfer out from the general fund to the capital outlay fund. It was approximately $7.5 million. The important thing to note here is that for revenues, The variance was about $446,000. That means that revenues came in above budget by about $446,000. The other thing to note is that we always budget for about a $1.2 million anticipated variance, and that's budgeted in the revenues. So really, we came in at like $1.6 million above revenues. So it was a really good showing. And second, on expenditures, they came in about $2.2 million below budget. So expenditures also performed very well. If you move to the 1.2 variance, it's about $1 million difference. But overall, the difference is $2.6 million to the good. And the other number I really wanted to focus on was that $1.7 million, that excess deficiency number on the actual column. That number is the difference between actual revenues and actual expenditures. But I wanted to note that actually that number is double on how we ended the year. Per city reserve policies, we do take 50% of the general fund surplus and transfer that to the capital outlay fund. So we actually ended the year at about $3.4 million and then moved half of that to the capital outlay fund. There's one other fund I wanted to spend a little time talking about, and that's the self-insurance fund. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because there has been a pretty significant change in this fund over the last year. At the end of fiscal year 12, the fund balance was about $500,000 was the net position for this fund. And now at the end of fiscal year 13, it's about $2.9 million negative. And the reason for this is there was about 2 years of some claims, and the actuarial valuation came in and increased our rates, our claims payable number, that $8.2 million, which really took our account negative, took our fund negative. And we just wanted to bring this to your attention because it's a potential liability for the city. It is a liability for the city. And even though we don't owe that claims right now, we could. And this is how they're assessing us, and this is how they're evaluating us. Staff doesn't think this trend will continue. We are not at this time recommending to council to increase allocated cost rates to the different funds, other than maybe a small increase when we take the budget. But we are not recommending to increase it to offset this $3 million at this time. Any questions before I move on to any of the key footnote disclosures? Okay. These are a couple footnote disclosures that we feel are important and require a little more explanation. The first one is on the retirement plan. It's footnote 9 on pages 61 through 63. Our retirement plan with CalPERS, we are required to provide a disclosure on this. And I just wanted to go through, this is our actual required disclosure. For fiscal year 2013, it actually is valued based back to a date of 6/30/2010. So it is a 3-year-old valuation date. The accrued liability, that's what we would need to have in the bank right now to pay off that liability. And then the actuarial value of assets, that's what we actually have based on the actuarial evaluation. It is not the market value. The unfunded liability is the difference between the accrued liability and the value of the assets, which calculates to the funded status of the plan. So for the miscellaneous plan, it's the funded status based on this actuarial value is 78%, safety fire is almost 81%, and safety police is about 79%. So this brings us back to what is an actuarial value of assets. Well, this is not market value. It's a little bit over, it's an inflated rate. They do actually it's inflated because it's done to smooth out the rate so that we don't have 1 year of very large gains or 1 year of very large losses. So then we've decided, we should show this to you in market value terms. So the next slide will show you what's the true market value of assets and what does this do to our funded status. So you'll notice based on the same fiscal year and valuation date, the market value, what it does to that funded status. So the prior percentages were between 78 and 81%, and then they fall down to about 61 to 63%. So it is a pretty significant difference. The next slide, we do get valuations every fall, every October, so we have some more recent data. So we wanted to present you with the most current data that we have. So for every plan except for fire, we have current data for fiscal year 2015 provided with a valuation date of 6/30/2012. However, for the safety fire plan, because this is now being pooled with other safety fire plans, we weren't able to get individual data for it, so I am using 2014 data. But overall, we just wanted to give you an idea of how it's trending, what's happening, and these percentages have gone up. They are now between 66 and 70%. They are a little bit lower than they were in fiscal year 2014. They did drop a little bit, the funded status. We do have some other post-employment benefits and some other potential liabilities, so we just wanted to touch on those a little bit. For footnote 17, pages 72 to 77, we have two separate liabilities that I wanted to discuss a little bit. The first one is the retiree medical and implied subsidy. Retiree medical is that the city does provide a retiree medical benefit to retirees up to age 65 and based on certain criteria. And this is the liability related to that retiree medical benefit. Also included in there is an implied subsidy. Basically what this means is that our retirees are allowed to participate in our plan, our health plan. And because of that, they get a discounted rate for their health plan. And we're required to now calculate that and determine what would the liability be related to that discounted rate. So the total value of that accrued liability is about $36.5 million. Of that, $9 million relates to retiree medical. The rest relates to that implied subsidy. Another item is the sick leave. We do provide some sick leave retiree benefits for retirees that also have CalPERS pension benefits, and the total liability for that is about $5 million.
I just wanted to add, you all remember that starting this fiscal year, we decided that we were going to start putting money aside to start funding some of these liabilities. So we are doing so for the retiree medical piece, which is the $9 million below that's in the box, as well as a sick leave. And even though it's not considered a post-retirement benefit, post-employment benefit, excuse me, we are also funding vacation cash outs, because when an employee leaves or retires, we have an obligation to cash out their vacation, and it has a budgetary impact for us. So we are now funding an estimated amount for vacation, sick leave, and the retiree medical so that we don't fall behind and we actually start making ground toward funding this requirement. We're not, however, doing that for the implied subsidy. It's the biggest number there, about $27 million. It's just a discounted premium we provide to our retirees. Council could decide to change that any given Tuesday. It's a big number for us to try to put money aside for. And it's kind of an artificial liability, in our opinion, because we are always paying a little bit more. So it's not something we consider to be an adequate liability for us to fund. We can change it. We can decide to do away with it any given Tuesday. But I think, as I said, it's kind of an artificial liability. But we have to disclose it here just so that people have a sense of what's the magnitude of those benefits we're providing to retirees and current employees who may retire and be eligible for that benefit.
Mr. Samar, did we break this out for enterprise versus general fund?
We do. Councilmember Rouse, yes. Every single fund has a piece of this, so the general fund will have a piece of it, and of course based on number of employees. So this liability is spread out, really owed by the various funds, water, wastewater, downtown parking, as well as the general fund.
So one more footnote we wanted to bring to your attention is the related to streets infrastructure. Pages 85 to 86 discusses the pavement condition index. This is also a potential unfunded liability for the city. Under accounting standards, we're required to evaluate the condition of our pavements, and Public Works does an annual study on the condition of the pavements every year, and based on that, they do a pavement condition index. For CAFR reporting purposes, we actually only update it every 2 years. The requirement is every 2 years, so that's why you will see it go 69, 69, and then 63, 63. But the study is being done annually. So we wanted to bring this to your attention because when we started in 2008-9, we were at a PCI rating of 71. The city had established a minimum standard of 60 and had established an estimate, which is that one column, of how much they believed it would take to keep the standard of a 70 with the goal to never reach below a 60. And then the expenditures is how much we've actually spent. So you'll notice that the PCI rating has been declining. Our expenditures have not been hitting the estimate. We haven't been spending as much as what we've been estimating it would cost to keep that PCI at a 70. The other thing to note is that we have changed our methodology just recently, Public Works has, in how they perform their analysis of the conditions of the pavements. So it's about a 2-point difference. So if we had the same methodology, the 63 would actually be a 65. So it is something that since Finance Committee, we've gotten some additional information and found out that's why there is such a significant difference.
So if I understand what you're saying, the real number is 65. We want to get to 70. If we want to maintain where we are or get up to 70, we really should be spending twice as much as we are in the budget for street repair?
I would say the real number is 63. They've changed their methodology to get a more accurate picture of the condition of the pavements. It just is a different, it's in between two of the years is when the methodology changed. It just to be able to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, it really isn't clear that we've dropped from 71 to 63. You really could say we dropped from a 69 to a 63.
So, but for future budgetary planning, if we wanted to get back up to 70, we need to double our streets funding.
More than
It's
double.
more than double because we're falling behind. So it is almost an aggregate total of where we've continued to, we'd have to catch up to improve our pavements.
Okay, Mr. Hart?
Yeah, unfortunately, the fundamental problem with this funding decline is the gas tax. The gas tax is set at a certain amount per gallon, and it hasn't changed in 20 years, more than 20 years, both at the state and federal level. So the reality is inflation has eroded the purchasing power of the gas tax by probably 60% of its purchasing power. So fundamentally, that is the problem. And until that's changed at either the state or federal level, we're going to always be paying, suffering from this in terms of the primary funding source for transportation is the gas tax, and appropriately so. And back many, many, many years ago, before I think this issue became politicized, the legislatures, both at the state and federal level, just set the gas tax at the rate that was necessary to capture the revenue to pay for roads. It was essentially a user fee. And now, for some reason, politically, it's become very sticky, and legislatures are reluctant to change that because it's not a very popular fee. I think mostly because people don't understand it. They think that as gas prices increase, the gas tax must increase, and that's not the case. So this is a really tough issue. There's some effort at the state level by all the transportation advocacy groups to increase the vehicle license fee. There was going to be an initiative that was going to be on the ballot in 2014 to attempt to address this problem, not by raising the gas tax because they didn't think it was politically feasible, but by actually increasing the vehicle license fee. Unfortunately, that was withdrawn just, I think, this week because they did polling and found that is also incredibly unpopular. So unfortunately, all the tools that really are available to address this at a systemic level at the state and certainly the federal level, it's even worse. There's just not anybody even talking about raising the gas tax at the federal level, are really being foreclosed. So this is a serious problem that local governments are going to have to wrestle with and figure an answer to.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The essence of my question is all of the funding for this coming from gas tax or from the money that is spent? What's the source of that funding besides now we're putting some out of our hide into this, but
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, there are three primary funding sources, gas tax being one of them. The Measure A, which replaced Measure D, the half-cent sales tax, that's also part of the funding. And then they get half of our utility users tax that we split between the general fund and the streets fund. It's about $6 million or $7 million that goes into each of those funds. So those are the three primary funding sources for our streets program.
Okay, and in proportion, was that in the order of proportion? The gas is number one?
I think and I'm not sure, but I think the UUT is the largest portion, followed by the Measure A, and then followed by gas tax.
Okay, that's pretty pathetic. Thank you.
Mr. Hart, did you have another comment? Next, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Now I'm going to focus on what the audit requirements and audit results were. We did have Rich Kikuchi here at the Finance Committee meeting from our independent audit firm, LS&L, and he did present some thorough information for Finance Committee, so I'm going to summarize that for you today. The objectives of an audit from our independent audit firm are to express an opinion as to whether the financial statements are being presented fairly in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles. And they also, as part of their audit, they will go and look at our internal controls and evaluate them and determine whether or not we have sound internal controls. And they have issued a letter that was also discussed at the Finance Committee on internal controls, as well as a communication letter. And you'll find at the back of your CAFR, the very last item is a report on internal controls. The city received what's called an unmodified opinion. That might sound different from prior years. They actually changed the terminology this year. It used to be unqualified. It is a clean opinion. The way they look at it is without modification are our financial statements presented fairly. So it's now called an unmodified opinion. The auditors did reply with a communication letter, that they had no disagreements with city management, that they identified no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls, and that there were no indications of fraudulent or inappropriate activities. There was one other item we wanted to bring to your attention. I know it's been brought to you before, but it's a pretty big item. We have a new GASB statement that will be coming out and becoming effective in 2 years for fiscal year 15. And what it says is that all of those unfunded pension liabilities that we currently just disclose in the footnotes are now going to need to go on the face of our financial statements. And they're pretty big liabilities, and there is the potential that it will turn us upside down for government-wide. This is all agencies. All government agencies have to implement this new GASB. It's going to hit some agencies a lot worse than others. There are some agencies that provide very extensive retiree benefits, and it's going to take them very negative. We're not quite in that situation, but there is the potential that we could go negative with these new unfunded liabilities being on the face. And we wanted to point that out because it is going to be a pretty big item. It's coming in 2 years, and it's just something to keep in mind that even though it's not next year, that all of the agencies will be looking at it, so we won't be alone, but it is a requirement.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Does this new GASB requirement affect our bond rating?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, good question. I don't think so because they're all well aware of this. It's not like it's a new liability. It's just how we report it. So it's going to be disclosed on the financial statements on the face of the balance sheet rather than in footnotes. But they're all well aware of that. I think what they'll do is sort of look at the balance sheets, take out that unfunded liability amount, and then evaluate like they always do. So I don't think it's going to have a big impact. And then that's based on some conversations I've had with rating agencies and our own financial advisors that they're going to just sort of push that aside and look at it like they normally do.
I think that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Good job. You made it through your first CAFR at council, so
Thank you.
congratulations. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Rouse.
Just one more question. I've asked this before, but when you express in the revenues in the transit occupancy tax, which 2% is Measure B, but is that expressed in that number, or is that kept separately in a general fund? Where do we put that revenue?
Councilmember Rouse, that 2% goes into our Creeks Fund, the Creeks Water Quality and Restoration Fund. So it's separate from the general fund, and that's where it's accounted for. So,
But it's in
the CAFR.
Yeah.
If you look at, it's one of the special revenue funds. If you're looking at the individual funds, you're probably not going to see it other than in the back of the document. It's also included on a combined basis in the governmental activities column within the government annual statements. But it is in there as an individual fund, but it's probably toward the back.
Right, so as I look at this number on page 25, then that's net of the Measure B? Under general revenues?
Page 25.
17 million.
So on page 25, those revenues, those taxes do include the money that the Creeks Fund would have collected as their share of the bed tax.
But that's included in that number?
Yeah, it is. Because
Okay.
this is a representation of all governmental funds, general fund,
Okay.
special revenue funds.
So
and
it's
the
still
Creeks-
called a TOT at this point,
Yes.
and then we break it out later
Yes.
on? Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments, or a motion?
I move we accept the report.
Second.
Okay, great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, any council member committee assignment reports? Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of items of interest about water, a hot topic. Last Thursday, I attended the Central Coast Water Authority meeting. That's our branch of the State Water Project. And one of the items reported on was that we are pumping water from San Luis Reservoir, which is part of the State Water Project up near Gilroy, San Luis Reservoir into Lake Cachuma, approximately 7,500 acre feet. And that water is carryover water that belongs to the various agencies. Santa Barbara's share of that is about 2,600 acre feet. So that's good news. And the city is also pursuing the possibility of buying water from farmers for whom it's a better deal for them to sell it to the cities than it is to grow crops in some cases. So even though our state water allocation looks like it's going to be zero this year, unless something radically changes, the network is still useful to us because it allows us to store water in other places, as we did in San Luis Reservoir, and bring it in, or purchase water from other purveyors on the network. So that was one thing. Then on Monday, the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board met, and I think the most interesting item on our agenda on Monday was a discussion of what to do as the lake level continues to fall. And one of the effects of that is there's an intake tower where the water comes in from the lake and goes into the system and through Tecolote Tunnel over to our side of the hill. We are at this point 19 feet above the input on the input tower, and the water's still dropping. So similar to what happened back in the 90s, we've hired an engineering firm to scope the project, come up with a preliminary design, and then put it out to bid. And the idea is to have a raft out where there's still water, have pumps on the raft, and then pipe that back to the intake tower so that we can continue to draw water as long as possible.
A lot of work there. Thank you. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And following Mr. Francisco's comments on water as the liaison to the Water Commission, I wanted to make a couple of comments as well. Obviously, we've seen Governor Brown declare a drought emergency for the state, and coming to Santa Barbara in 2 weeks will be we'll have the documentation is in place. The hearing is scheduled for the city to declare a drought condition, and that would be for a drought watch. And so what we're doing now is, as Mr. Francisco said, there's some supplemental supplies that our staff has ably gathered in previous years and that are available to us. But complacency is not the word of the day here. We need to be conserving water. If we can conserve water today, we can avoid going into a drought emergency in the future. And obviously, we don't know today. If you look at the weather chart today, it's still just California is a very dry place today. So I've asked staff to put on our PowerPoint here our water conservation hotline, and so we ask everybody to look at your water use and to cut back where you can. Conserve even more. We need to tighten our belts as best we can, and of course, hope for rainfall. We still have a couple of months left in our rainy season, and hopefully this will turn around. But let's conserve now, and even in the next 2 weeks, we can conserve hundreds of acre-feet of water, which, if we continue in a very dry spell, that will be very, very valuable water, even more valuable water in the future than it is now. So I'm just uttering yet one more cautionary tale, and I know we'll hear much more in 2 weeks about the details of our situation and things we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On an entirely different note, I had the honor and enjoyment of attending the Black History Month worship and celebration at Marjorie Luke Theater Sunday. I hadn't heard gospel music like that in a long time, and it was I represented and said I did both you and the council. They were glad to have somebody there, and that went on for 2.5 hours. I didn't stay the whole time, but I did remark to them, and I thought it was a good thing to say. There were a lot of young people there as part of the church. That was really good to see. So many times you only see older folks. So it was great to see young people who, life's confusing. It's good that they have a rock like that they turn to.
Thanks for being there. I know we had conflicts that weekend. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you very much. Oh, okay. We were, Councilmember Francisco and I were at the Marjorie Luke. Oh, no, we were at the other one, at the Arlington. So thank you for representing us there.
At Martin Luther King.
Right. Oh, you're talking about Black History Month.
Right.
Oh, I missed that one. So thank goodness you're there. Okay. I attended the Affordable Housing Task Force meeting last week, and we heard a nice presentation on green building, and that was from People Self-Help Housing. And we meet quarterly, and the next time we meet, we'll have a presentation about infrastructure finance districts, IFDs. I see you smiling, Mr. Armstrong, because it's hopefully a substitute for RDA. Not going to be as good, but there's movement afoot statewide to try to add an element to create funding for affordable housing. So we'll have a presentation on that in a couple of months. I also attended, with a lot of others here, the Greater Santa Barbara Lodging and Restaurant Association luncheon, and I just wanted to congratulate Anne Marie Rogers, and then Tom from Ramada was here last night, and I'm forgetting his last name. Tom Patton with Ramada, right? And they were honored for their contribution to the hospitality industry. So, and it was a nice luncheon too. And then I was going to say too that we were at the Marjorie Luke and did for the Martin Luther King Day and did all the events in the plaza, and it was just a wonderful day with good food and singing, etc. So I'm glad I was able to represent the city at that event.
Thank you for doing that. I was last week in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Conference of Mayors winter meeting, and as always, the U.S. Conference of Mayors has a great connection to the administration, and the highlight was Thursday, over about 300 mayors. We did go to the White House and had conversations with 4 different secretaries, the Secretary of Transportation, HUD, Labor, and Education, and then the Vice President and President came and spoke to the mayors. And then, of course, there were different plenary sessions and other workshops. I got to meet and have a long conversation with Barbara Popey, who's the Executive Director for the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. So we talked restorative policing, and she really liked what we were doing here. So I'm sending her some more information about that, and good way to share a lot of great information. So it's always a good meeting to go to once a year. With that, we have a number of closed sessions, if you could read those.
Item 17, conference with labor negotiator. Item 18, conference with legal counsel regarding pending litigation. Item 19, conference with real property negotiators. And item 20, conference with legal counsel regarding pending litigation.
Thank you, and we will adjourn from there.